Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott. I'm here today to do kind of an unboxing and a first look at a lens that's really unlike any that I've reviewed before. This is from a new startup company, Venus Optics, and they sell under the brand Laowa. And so anyway, they've had a few unique lenses already come to market that do things unlike others, including a 15mm lens that also happens to be a 1:1 macro. And in this lens, this is the Laowa STF, which stands for Smooth Trans Focus, and it is 105mm f2. But then also you'll see something different is it's f2, and then in brackets it is a t-stop of 3.2. And that refers to something very unique about the design of this lens that we'll jump in just a moment. One thing I do want to note as far as the unboxing section is that it comes in a package that very swiftly reminds me of another manual focus type lens. It's a white sleeve with around the box inside, and even on the actual sleeve here it has a look at the innards of the lens and the optical formula, the various elements that make up the optical formula. And I'm reminded, of course, of Zeiss and their new presentation, which also comes in a sleeve around the box. And then if you look inside, there is a look at the inner workings of the lens, the optical formula, and then of course beyond that, new Zeiss lenses, they come in a custom molded box and with a place here for some documentation. So interestingly, if you slide off the Laowa box, as I said already, you have that presented inside, and then inside you also have a similar kind of custom molding that's for the lens with a little slot here for the documentation. And so you know, they say that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, and so I think Zeiss should probably be flattered here. And certainly if you're going to try to present yourself in an elegant way, a classy way, Zeiss is a great mentor to pick. And so kudos to this new company for going the extra mile to present their product in a nice way. Now when you go to look at the lens itself, it also certainly has some Zeiss feel to it in the sense that it's really got that heft of an all metal and glass construction that feels dense in your hand. And so this lens, it does have a significant weight to it, not overbearingly so, but it's 745 grams. That's 1.64 pounds. And so held in the hand, and as you can see, its length, it's a little bit longer than I just did a review of the Zeiss Milvis 50mm f1.4. So it's a bit longer a lens than that. It's right under 4 inches, 3.89 inches, and right under 100 millimeters or 98.9 millimeters. And so it's what I would call a medium-sized lens, but with a certain heft to it. And as far as the overall construction, it's a nice looking lens. It has a lot of the sensibilities that I've appreciated in some of the film era lenses, many of which that were designed in a similar style with metal focus rings, metal construction, nice aperture rings, and then of course a lot of glass inside. And so in that sense, it's similar to many of those lenses. It has a very nice and wide, about 1.5 inch wide focus ring that moves along, you know, if not quite with perfect Zeiss precision, it moves along very, very nicely with a nice damping that is just slightly on the heavier side, but it moves along nice and easily, and it feels nice to the touch, nice to operate, and it has a nice focus throw that I estimated about 220 degrees roughly, or very similar to a number of Zeiss lenses. And so all of that is good. The lens optical formula is 11 elements in 8 groups. It can focus down to right under 3 feet or 90 centimeters and has a 0.16 times magnification. So not fantastic, but slightly better than, say, 85mm lenses and what they are able to perform. The front filter thread is metal, and it is in a very, very common 67mm filter thread, and so that can be shared with a lot of other different lenses. Now, when we get to the part about having both an f-stop value of f2 as the maximum aperture value of the lens, But then also there is a T-stop included. And the reason for that is really all about the unique design of the lens. There's only a couple of other lenses like this that exist. One's an older Sony design, and then there's another newer Fujifilm design that is also designed in a similar way, in which there are actually two aperture rings here. There is the traditional aperture ring with f-stops from f2 all the way to f22, and let me just note on that aperture ring that it moves very nicely with just light detents at every full aperture stop. There are no half stops here that I can tell. It's just at full aperture stops, but it moves along very nicely and has a good precision feel to it. But then beyond that, there's the ring that is labeled smooth transfocus, and that is actually identified in T-stops. And so it's a second aperture iris and a second aperture ring, and it is designed to move in a declicked fashion, like a cinema version of a lens. Now, the traditional aperture has 8 aperture blades, and they are rounded blades, and you can see that because you can see as it stops down, you can see that it rounds down very nicely. And then the declicked aperture, the STF aperture, is actually a 14-bladed aperture and also very, very circular in orientation. It has no kind of predefined f-stop apertures, although equivalent f-stop apertures are shown between T3.2, which is the wide open value, through f8, or in this case T8. And so what that allows you to do, of course, is to do aperture racking for those of you that shoot cinema. But when it comes to still shooters, what it allows you to do is to control your bokeh performance in a little bit of a different fashion. And what essentially this is connected to an APD element, which, by the way, is an expensive element that usually shows up in lenses with a bigger price tag than this. But it almost works a little bit like an ND filter in that it helps to focus light towards the center. And as a result of the design between these two apertures, along with the optical formula, is that it really works to eliminate kind of hard edges when it comes to your out of focus rendering. And so as a result, even, for example, in this shot, I shot just like Christmas lights. And typically you'll have a very well-defined circle. The circle's there, but you'll see almost like a little bit of a doubling effect or a light bleed to where it's softening that overall look between two different apertures. And so while it doesn't work so well for this, in my opinion, what it does do is that in typical shooting settings, it produces really nice and creamy bokeh. In fact, they're kind of euphemism from Laowa for this lens is this is the bokeh dreamer. And so what it does do, however, is give you very nice sharpness, and the resolution from the lens is actually quite high. It gives you a very nice resolution on your subject, but the ability then to control your depth of field and also the quality of the bokeh in a different way. I found, and of course, these two aperture rings, they're not actually designed to be used in conjunction with each other, but rather it's an either-or situation. Basically, what I found in real-world use is that there is about a one-stop advantage to the overall size and softness of the bokeh rendering by using the STF ring as opposed to the traditional f-stop ring. So what that means, for example, is that f5.6 on the STF ring is going to look more like the overall bokeh from f4 aperture value. And so it gives you that bit of an advantage to where you're getting the light transmission and the depth of field of f5.6, but with a softer bokeh performance. And that aperture ring goes only up to T8. And so, so your advantage is between T3.2 and T8. Overall, the look of the images wide open is very nice. I'll throw up a few samples here. I'll be doing a bigger breakdown of the overall performance of the lens and its handling. But let me just say that when it comes to the overall handling of the lens, this is a manual focus only lens. It's a little bit more complex than usual because of the options of using the two different apertures. And it also is a little bit more complicated because of the variance in the T-stop. Because of that second aperture, typically an f2 lens would have a T-stop of somewhere around T2.2 or, at worst, maybe around T2.4 or 5. In this case, of course, the T-stop value, because of that element as well as that additional aperture ring, is T3.2. And so there's not as much light transmission. As a result, I like to use a Canon 60 body with an EGS focus screen on it. And so as a result, I get a little bit darker a viewfinder than what I anticipate because of the lower light transmission. So if you're shooting in lower light conditions, this lens is a little bit more challenging to use than, say, a lens like the Milvus that I've just reviewed, because the light transmission is much lower. In fact, it's about the equivalent of an f2.8 lens rather than an f2. Just know that this lens is really for people, I would say, that are comfortable in using manual focus lenses. And because of the two different aperture rings and the fact that there's really no electronics in this lens, I'm reviewing in a Canon EF mount here, and so there are no real electronics in the lens, but there is a chip that's been added, and that chip, I think it's probably like a dandelion type chip, if you're familiar with adding those to other lenses. Some of you out there know what I'm talking about. But basically, it's programmed to where it shows when I take images into Lightroom, for example, it'll show that it's 105 millimeter f2. It also provides the ability to have a focus confirmation, like the appropriate focus point will light up when a focus is achieved. And so that's, one focus aid that helps a bit there. But you will find that because of the two apertures, that this lens doesn't meter super well. And so you have to sometimes compensate for the metering using your own head, or either that or some kind of external metering source. And so I say that it's not a lens for beginners, but rather those that have some experience. The trade-off is that you can get some really, really nice images out of a lens that has a relatively inexpensive $699 price tag, and it's a very nicely built lens and delivers very good image quality. If you'll look down below in the description section, I have got linkage to an image gallery that I've got going, and so you can start to look at the images that I'm producing as I'm going through this review process. And there's also linkage there to follow me on social media, as well as if you would like to shop for this lens for yourself. I'm Dustin Abbott. Thanks for watching.